Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be presenting my late philosopher presentation for AgEd 5306. My name is Brett Baker. For this presentation, I decided to focus my efforts on highlighting the legacy of Charles Prosser. For those of us who are in this profession, we have benefited from Charles and his efforts throughout his career in the promotion and really the foundational framework of what we know as vocational education today. A little bit of background information on Charles. He is known as the father of vocational education. During my research, I also found another alias of his being the father of the Smith-Hughes Act, which is a profound piece of legislation that really has set the framework for what we know today as vocational education. And we'll talk more about that later on. Uh, Charles was born September 20th of 1871 in Indiana and did pass away November 26th of 1952 uh, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Charles was born into a steelworkers family, so from very early on in his lifetime, he understood and respected the idea of having a trade set of skills and being able to put those to work to earn a living for a family, which is what his father did. Charles attended elementary school and high school in his home state of Indiana, went on to be what we would consider a lifelong learner. He was a very, very successful student, and that trickled into his professional career as an educator and advocate for vocational education. Prosser attended DePauw University and graduated in 1897 with his bachelor's and in 1906 with his master's. He did go on to earn two additional educational degrees, a bachelor's of law from the University of Louisville, and then his PhD from Columbia University. Because of his passion for education and his continued advocacy for it, throughout his life, he was awarded various honorary degrees from various universities across the United States, really to just highlight and recognize him for his work and advocacy for vocational education. Through my research, I did find that Charles Prosser was a very accomplished educator and a very accomplished student, as I mentioned just before. I have highlighted a few here in bulleted format, some that I'll talk specifically to, and others that I did not list. But as I mentioned very early on in the presentation, one of the most profound impacts that he had was being one of the architects of what we know as the Smith-Hughes Act. That is an act that was pushed through and approved through legislation. It was not an easy task. It was a task that had seen many failures before there were a team of gentlemen who were able to really write the legislation in a way that highlighted its purpose, its intended purpose, and its intended benefit for young people and society as a whole. Um, but before he was able to find himself on that level, he did work various jobs locally. He was the superintendent of the post office in the state of Missouri. He has served as a teacher, as a principal, and as a superintendent in the state of Indiana. He was also the assistant commissioner of education in the entire state of Massachusetts from 1910 to 1912. He was uh, highlighted or hired as the executive secretary of the National Society of the Promotion of Industrial Education, which is where he really started to channel his efforts into that vocational education portion. And that took place from 1912 to 1915. And from here on, we see him really build his effort and build steam towards the Smith-Hughes Act as he became the director of the Federal Board of Vocational Education, the first ever director of the Federal Board of Vocational Education from 1917 to 1919. Now you'll notice here that that actually took place within the time frame that Charles was the director of the William H. Dunwoody Institute in Minneapolis. So he did take a time away from being the director of the Dunwoody Institute to be the first director of the Federal Board of Vocational Education. During that time at the federal level, Charles really had set the ground and the standard for vocational education as a result of that Smith-Hughes Act. During his time promoting and being an advocate for education, specifically vocational education, Charles Prosser developed 16 theorems that have stuck and stayed true for many, many years since his passing. Those 16 theorems are listed in very brief titles here. In order for vocational education and a vocational education program to be effective, Charles believed that each of these items needed to be true. There needed to be a work environment that was where students were learning, but also would be accustomed to transitioning into. The work environment needed to be replicated. There needed to be industry relevant standards that were embedded in the curriculum as teachers teaching young people, so that that transition into the workforce was pretty seamless. Work habits needed to be set again at a very, very high standard. A couple of these that I'll pick from. One thing that he did believe in was that this was not something to be forced upon everybody. He didn't say that college was a bad thing, but he did recognize that college may not be for everyone. So he believed that this vocational education pathway or program should be an elective option. It should be just that, an option for those who were interested. One thing that I did recognize before I get to my impactful quote was that he worked very hard throughout his entire career to promote what he would call dual control. He didn't believe that vocational education should be coupled within the Department of, or the blanket or umbrella of, the General Department of Education. He believed that it should be dually controlled. It should be separate from general education boards and different governing bodies. He believed that vocational schools and courses should be administered separately from those general boards of education to allow them to grow, to allow them to adapt over time to meet the needs of the young people that they were intended to serve. As I look back on my time as an FFA student, as an ag student in high school, I learned a lot of these technical skills that I'm now being able to use as a homeowner, as a do-it-yourself weekend warrior, and also as an ag mechanics teacher. When we go from full circle in vocational education, in ag education, we really do see and can acknowledge the legacy of Charles Prosser. Again, he believed in that power of vocational education. Students may not take it into a lifelong career. They may, just like I noted earlier, take it into a hobby or a simple do-it-yourselfer weekend warrior for homeowners. It is something that I believe our society needs. I believe that Charles laid that framework, and to see where it has gone and where it has evolved, he would be very proud if he were still with us today. One quote that I did find during my research reads, "The purpose of vocational education is to help a person secure a job, training so that he can hold it after he gets it, and assist him in advancing to do a better job." Again, I believe that within that quote, we can see just who Charles Prosser was and how he believed in life being a lifetime learner. You'll notice that we're advancing ourselves. We're not staying stagnant. I believe that's what Charles really worked and strived to embed in his legislation with the Smith-Hughes Act and within our vocational education programs that we see today. Some of my references, again, thank you for taking the time today to learn a little bit about Charles Prosser through my eyes and through my lens. Again, a very instrumental professional in our career field of ag education. Thank you.